Hi, World History students. Today we're going to be looking at some topics that show up in Chapter 2 of our textbook that really set the stage for the rest of world history that we're going to look at this whole year. And it's really diving into some of the earliest history. In fact, some of it's going to be what we end up calling prehistory, before there's even written records, all the way until we have some early agriculture. So today we're going to be looking at some information we know about hunter and gatherer societies, and also how they transitioned into early agricultural societies and what that looks like. So as we go through here, you're going to notice that a lot of this information is going to tie in with what you've seen in the book, what you may see in some video clips we're going to provide. But on the whole, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe what are some characteristics of hunters and gatherers, how did we get to agriculture, and what does a basic agricultural society look like, or what sort of features does it have. So let's start off with some basic vocabulary here, and we're going to look at two major time periods. The Paleolithic time period and the Neolithic underneath there, which is a little bit later. So Paleolithic basically translates into Old Stone Age. It's longer ago, it's a long, long time ago, and Stone Age. So you have to think, it's Stone Age, why would they call it that? They're mostly using stone tools. So this is before people are using metal, before you're going to have like iron tools or bronze tools. This is stone tools. So the Old Stone Age, and then later, go down a little bit to the Neolithic or New Stone Age, Neo meaning new. A little bit later on, we're going to see maybe more advanced tools. So when we look at this time period, I already mentioned we're going to be talking about hunters and gatherers. They're going to mostly fit in that first one, the Old Stone Age, the Paleolithic period. Hunters and gatherers, they use simple stone tools, and it falls under something called prehistory. Prehistory means before history. So you might wonder, like, what does that mean? Because this is still a history, isn't it? And if you're a historian, you look at history as being written records. So this is before people were really writing anything down. They didn't have the means to write. They didn't have the need to write. So a lot of what we know from this time period comes from artifacts. So if we find, some tools, some stone tools, if we find some cave paintings, things like that is where we know where we get most of our information about this time period. For the Neolithic time period, we're going to move into that as we go through this lesson. We're going to start seeing agriculture develop, which we're going to see as being a big change. Tools become more complex. There's multiple parts to the tool. It might be, instead of just a rock that you hit something with, now we're talking about a spear or an early kind of bow and arrow kind of situation. And we're going to start seeing the earliest civilizations. And we'll talk about what that means as we go through. Okay, so let's dive into hunter and gatherers. Essentially, it's what the name says. So what do? They hunt and they gather. So gathering berries, other sorts of edible plants, and they're hunting game. Now, this is basically how they subsided. As you might imagine, this means that you're on the move all the time. If the herd moves, you move. If you gathered all of the plants from a certain area, you have to go to a different area to get more things to eat. So with that in mind, because they're nomadic or because they move a lot, they don't have a lot of stuff. They have to be self-sufficient within their group. So we are talking about a group of no more than about 50 people. So we're talking usually 30 to 50 people. And they're just always on the move. So their shelters look like very temporary shelters. So if you can find a cave to stay in, they're very simple. You're not bringing them with you normally because you can't carry it. You're always moving. Most of their tools are pretty simple too. Maybe they're bone, stone, wood, very simple, basically usually stone-based tools. Additionally, these societies don't have any formalized government. There's no king. There's no democracy with a formal voting system. Essentially, it's a small enough group that all decisions are made by the group. And usually, if there's any kind of conflict, they're basing this around the teachings of the elders. People that have made it more winters than anybody else, you should probably listen to them because they've stayed alive. There's no strict social order either. It's pretty much equal across the group. And so you don't have rich people and poor people. You just have everyone in your group basically being equal. And everything is shared. So how do we find out about this? We already said that there's not really any written records. They don't have writings. You can't go read the books of hunters and gatherers from, 10,000 years ago. You just can't. But archaeologists, so those are people that look at artifacts, they can study the tools to really determine how advanced a society was. So like I mentioned before, like maybe it's just a rock to hit something with. If it's a rock that doesn't have a lot of change to it, maybe not as advanced of a society. But if you start having arrowheads like this one on the picture over here, you can tell like this looks like someone's actually done some work to make it sharp, to make it the shape that they want it to. So that's going to take more skill. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more expertise. So they're going to look at that to help determine how advanced a society was. Additionally, if we don't have writing, how do they transmit information to each other? A lot of that happens through storytelling, through informal training. The kids in a hunter-gatherer society do not go to a formal school. You learn as a kid. You're doing everything with your parents. So a lot of that's just cultural transmission. One thing that archaeologists do note is that these tools change dramatically from the beginning of the Paleolithic period to the end. So when they start looking at how complex the societies are, they're seeing they're getting more and more complex as time goes on. We already talked a little bit about how mobile these groups are, but they're definitely mobile. You have to carry everything with you. And so if, nowadays people like to collect all the things. They like to have lots of stuff. But if you're a hunter and gatherer, you are living a very minimalist lifestyle. You just can't. You have to be ready to grab the baby and run in case of, something happening. You don't have really strong defenses, like in case of a wild animal attack or in case things are really bad, you need to move out of the way, so you really have to be pretty mobile. Eventually, as this time period goes on, not only do their resources or their tools get more complex, but we start seeing that, obviously we see that people are learning. So they're learning how to make better tools, and they're also learning that some places are really resource rich. So maybe a certain valley always seems to have tons and tons of fruit growing in it at certain times of the year. And so while hunter and gatherers are still mobile, they're still always on the move, archaeologists start noticing that they start moving to the same places again and again every year, these base camps. And with that in mind, we're going to start seeing how agriculture develops, or where they start intentionally growing certain things instead of just showing up at the same places again and again. So let's talk a little bit about this Neolithic period. Now, the big term that gets associated with it is Neolithic revolution. It's a revolution. This is a total change from how things were before, because we're going to have the beginning of agriculture. Now, I know a lot of times a lot of people don't really get excited about farming, but this is big, huge in the world of world history. So how does it happen? Where does it start? All those different things. So let's start with where. So if you look at this map up here, you're going to see in the green here, it's labeled Fertile Crescent. It's kind of around these couple of rivers here, the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. And other terms that get used for it, Mesopotamia gets used to describe the area between them. This whole green area gets known as the Fertile Crescent. So if something's fertile, it can grow really well. And it's kind of roughly crescent shaped-ish, maybe a little bit of a stretch. But during the later Paleolithic and now into the Neolithic period, there's some groups that start realizing this has really good soil. This is a really good place to grow things. Lots of natural resources there. And this is where we're probably getting agriculture starting. Now, how does that happen? We don't know exactly because there's no writing about who came up with it. But the theory basically runs that, you have a group that's staying at a base camp and they have a garbage pile. They dump all their extra stuff there. And they come back later and they're like, whoa, that's really crazy that in the garbage pit from last time we were here, there's all this grain growing. What if I did that intentionally? Why does that happen? Oh, I dumped my trash there. Maybe let's try it again intentionally. And over time, this accident becomes sort of like a light bulb moment. And it ends up with people intentionally growing and domesticating plants and animals for their own use. So domestication is an important term to kind of be aware of because you might see it in other places as well. Domestication here. It means that you are intentionally cultivating it to be better for human use. So originally, like wheat didn't look like this. It didn't have as many grains per stalk. Originally, it'd be, much, much more sparse. But if humans domesticated it, it means that they would intentionally look at, okay, so this grain isn't very good, but this one stalk is good. I'm going to replant that one. And then all the offspring of that one special wheat now grows more and more grains per stalk. And over time, you can get it to look the way you want it to. Same thing goes with animals. You can breed goats that have more meat or sheep that have more wool or whatever it might be that you're looking for. And they intentionally breed them genetically to be the way they want them to. So this is obviously a big game changer because now if you are specifically growing crops in an area, you're not really moving. You're staying put. And we're going to see how that plays a big role here in a minute. Now, one note, not everyone settled down. There were still groups known as pastoral nomads that moved from place to place, from pasture to pasture with like flocks of sheep. So while most people started to settle down during this Neolithic period, pastoral nomads still kind of move around. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So what's the point of this? Why does this matter? Why am I making a big deal out of it? Essentially, with agriculture, we're moving from a nomadic existence where people are moving from place to place to a sedentary or like a sitting still society. And when societies are not moving, the population can grow. So we're moving from a population of like 50 hunters and gatherers to maybe several hundred or a few thousand people all living in this little village or eventually a town or eventually a city. So population growth. And now that you're not moving, you can have more stuff and new technology starts springing up. So wheels, plows, pottery, eventually writing, all these start blossoming once people aren't moving all the time. They're also coming up with new farming methods. Your book talks a little bit about slash and burn farming, where they're burning the whole area to return the nutrients to the soil and then able to replant in that same area. And in general, this kind of like kickstarts a lot of change. Now, some of that change is good and some of it is really painful. So, trade's great. Defense sounds good, but why do you have to defend yourself? Maybe it's because somebody wants to take your crops. So now you need a fence. Now you need a wall. Now you need an army. You didn't need those things before, but now you do. We're also going to see for the first time a division into the haves and the have-nots in society. So remember with hunters and gatherers, basically everybody was equal. But now some people have more material goods than others, and we're going to start seeing social classes. We're also going to see more government. So people aren't equal anymore. There's some people that have more power than others. Maybe there's a king. Maybe it's a high priest. Maybe a religious figure ruling things. And there's also writing. So there's some good things and some bad things. It's really a mixed bag. And lastly, once we have agriculture and once we have this Neolithic revolution of beginning to be able to farm, we're going to see the term civilization come up for the first time in history books. So when we say that someone is civilized, or we say that there is a civilization, we are talking about a highly organized and complex society. And we will be looking at lots of different types of civilizations in the next few units. But these earliest ones all had a few things in common. They all had access to water. So we're going to see how a lot of these early cities, early villages, early farming communities are by water. So by rivers especially. They're going to have some kind of defense, whether that's a wall or a fence or an army, something to protect themselves. Some kind of government. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but they have something. They're starting to trade with each other. That's huge. They're trading both goods and they're trading ideas. Spreading ideas of new technology, trading all kinds of things. And we're going to see specialization of labor, which means that not everybody does the same jobs. With hunters and gatherers, everybody either hunts or gathers. But now we're going to see people that are in the military or that are in politics or that do carpentry. So these are some big factors. And we'll explore all of these in more detail in later